considered by archaeologists to be one of the oldest trade items on the planet. Trade beads have a big, long history, going back all over the world, 40,000 years.
Absolutely.
So no matter where you are on the planet, you will hear about, or eventually someone will begin a conversation about trade beads. I've been with Lindblad for 26 years. I've traveled all over the world with Lindblad, and during this presentation, we're going to visit 5 different Lindblad trips. And my mentor over all these years, and my very dear friend, is Janet Walker, and we are going to have a conversation through pictures about the journey of trade beads. For me, trade beads started when I was about 5 years old, and I got to handle my first trade beads that belonged to my father's mother. She had a bag of glass necklaces. I'm sure they were all Bohemian glass. They were absolutely beautiful. They're all hand faceted, and we spent a lot of time playing with her and playing with these necklaces, and that was my first introduction. Part of understanding trade beads is understanding the trade routes of the world. And the trade routes that began in Europe and ended up on the west coast of North America, all the way to China, were all based on trade that benefited every single person involved in the trade. And often it would begin with these gorgeous blue glass beads. What are the blue glass beads, and why do they call them Russian blues? Because they weren't made by Russians. They were not made by,
they weren't
but
made.
they were traded to the Russians.
Traded to the Russians.
And they were made in Bohemia. And the Bohemians, the Eastern Europeans, of which Janet and I are both descended, are very resourceful people. And the Bohemians would send out scouts with examples of different kinds of glass that they made. And one of the things that they found out was that the Russians were really interested in these beads, in the Russian blues. And so these wagon trains of glass went from Bohemia, from the Czech Republic, up into Russia.
Through
Siberia, traveled all over to the coast. And this is the origin of those beads, which I think is amazing. Everything that traded in this area, all up and down the northwest coast, including these beads, was then done by native people in these gorgeous canoes.
Now, at the same time that this was happening on the west coast of the North America, the Blue Russians were coming into the east coast through the Dutch traders. I was just reading the other day where some of these Blue Russians were found in a burial site from the 1700s in Tennessee.
Wow. That is really amazing.
You know, so they were coming in from that direction also and moving up and down and across the country.
And it comes in a variety of colors. It can come in kind of a deep, kind of a purple, almost an amethyst. It comes in many shades of blue. It comes in green, and it comes in almost a type of a reddish brown. Really, really amazing. And these are very rare and highly prized. So these kinds of colors, when you find them, you're going to be paying a real pretty penny
Look at
for
that
that.
pretty little teal one down there.
Ooh, nice. Really nice. Trade beads were coming in from all different directions into North America. From the Hudson Bay, we had beautiful white hearts coming down. From the East Coast, the time of Columbus, going all the way across the United States, what
these
became the
along
United
with
States,
them.
Padre beads, in a variety of colors. So the trade routes were really, really important. And it's amazing to see how it was coming into North America, to all the indigenous people. If you go anywhere in Indian country and start talking beads, you have the most extraordinary conversations. Dentalium was this huge trade item on the northwest coast that came from Vancouver Island, and it was traded all up and down.
And the macaw.
And they would use a very strange kind of a rake or comb.
Broom.
Like a broom.
A broom.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so maybe you got it and maybe
all
you
hooked
didn't.
together. Yes. So and it poked down into it and then like pulled them up like that.
Wow. And it was very valuable. And a
They grew
lot
like that.
Exactly. A lot of Columbia River native women would have headdresses made of these that they were married in. They're quite beautiful. One of the joys I've had with Lindblad is being able to explore the areas that we travel in. And while I was working on the Danube River, I had an idea to go to the origin of glassmaking, which is in the Czech Republic, and do a little reconnaissance, see what was there. So I traveled to the town of Jablonec, which is the origin of Bohemian glass. We traveled all throughout the community and visited an old tiny furnace from the 1800s and learned about the glass, watched those big long tubes of glass going into the furnace, saw this man cutting up the sections, actually making the beads the way his family had been doing it for 400 or 500 years.
They're all made one at a time.
Which is really amazing.
Yeah.
And if you look really closely at them, you can see that. How
They're
they've
all
been
different.
wound. I know.
Every single one
It's
is
completely different.
because of that technique of,
Wow.
of the glass, put it on there on the rod, and it wound, and then cooled, and then slipped off. See, these are mandrel wound eye beads.
Oh, wow.
You know, if you
Very,
don't-
very powerful, you know.
Yeah.
Very popular in Greece. Carnelian takes its origin, isn't it, from northern India?
Yes,
Janet?
Mohenjo-daro.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where they find these agates, they dig them up, and you know, heat treat them. I've found cooking rocks in my yard that are this color because they were in the sand. You know, they were used to heat the food with, and as the temperature changed, they started to turn this wonderful color.
And I'll bet you it was found out by accident.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah, I think it was found out by accident
Yeah,
around a cooking fire.
yeah.
It ended up being one of the biggest and oldest trade routes in all of the world, trading carnelian. They fed the exotic tastes of kings and queens all over.
Absolutely.
I mean, carnelian had supposedly all kinds of wonderful properties, and people wanted to have it. Lots of royalty wore carnelian.
Well, you see some of the, you know, go into museums and see some of the old royalty crowns and jewelry and, you know, amulets and carnelian.
It's
Always
amazing.
carnelian.
It's amazing.
They're
Yep.
crude and they're gorgeous.
They are, and the color is
Yeah,
just
and look at
astounding.
that
I
one,
know.
that
Yeah.
big one there.
Yeah, I know. I love that. Ooh, I like this color too. That one is wonderful.
Yeah, they're delicious.
So red is an interesting color, and red in jewelry, red in silk or clothing, it's considered a power color. And so any kind of jewelry that is red, think about rubies, is really important. And if you can have red, like the coral from the Mediterranean, that was a huge trade coming out of there. And the glassmakers wanted to come in on that. So look at this example right here. I mean, this is fantastic. And what I love about these, yep, there's a lovely piece of coral, is you can see how much gold has been used in these two sets of beads. These are probably, both of these, I think, quite old.
They're very old.
Gold chloride brings out the red, so they're very valuable. I've had lots of bead collectors come to me over this red necklace.
These are little big chunks of coral also.
Wow,
Old coral
really
beads.
nice. Yeah, really old coral. And then this one, tell me about that one.
In order to cut the cost down, they would make a bead in the pale color, and then they would coat it with this gold chloride glass to, you know, be able to make them in, you know, lots of them and make bigger profit.
Okay, I'll
Hang this over your wrist.
yeah, there we go. Beautiful. One of my favorite Lindblad trips to do is in the Baltic. And because I'm Polish, needless to say, I've had amber in my life all my life. I was teethed on amber. Looking at that amber trade route that came out of a peninsula between Russia and Poland called the Samland Peninsula and traveled all the way down, all through Europe, all the way into the Mediterranean, to the Romans, to the Greeks, to the Egyptians. Everyone held amber in really, really prized position. It's actually resin from inside of a tree that's anywhere from 25 to 90 million years of age. It is not fossilized, but it has plasticized. The molecules have slightly changed, making it very fragile, but also making it very workable. Used as a scent, used as jewelry, used as vessels, everything. Probably one of the older of all the trade routes, possibly as old or older than the Indian carnelian trade route. This kind of amber, which is from Africa, and then seeing this, all these kinds of unusual pieces of amber, and this is all Baltic amber.
And copal, which is a younger grade of amber.
Different set of trees. Really amazing. This necklace that I made has a little bit of these fancy beads that Janet has taught me about. I mean, that's
fancy.
They are bright blue,
Yeah.
covered in flowers.
Yeah, in fact, those white ones there with the pink on them have been called wedding cake beads.
Yes.
You know, they look like a wedding cake.
They do. They're just extraordinary.
All these
really,
stringers and,
yep,
you know, all
really,
this
really
individual
fancy.
little, it's an art form.
Yeah,
totally,
it is.
Totally.
It is.
They have stringers means a tiny little hair-sized or larger little colored glass pieces. And they're, you know, you just make them with the flame, and then you lay them down, And then when you got your wound bead on your iron rod, well, then you take these little stringers with the flame coming at it, and you just apply it, and it just sticks and melts, and you turn it, and it comes right on.
Wow.
Yeah, one at a time.
One at a time.
Yeah.
One at a time. That is incredible.
Yeah. Now it's the same principle with these, which are actually cornelian dileppos, in that they are lighter colored glass underneath with the gold chloroid over the top, and individually made on an iron rod, and then the white little stringers, there's spot attached. And then they would tumble them in sand, because some of them get pointy, you know, but that's how they're made. These little things are done the same way, but each one of them is decorated, so you can see little patterns of you know, swirls put on there.
Almost like the feathers.
Yeah, except with the feathers. And while the bead is red hot, another iron rod is pulled, dragged through it, so it creates this pattern that everybody says, "Oh, looks like a feather." The Lewis and Clark beads right there. This is the same kind of effect as those red spotties. But this is not a cornelian dileppo. This is basically just a milky glass.
Yeah.
And they're called Venetian fancies.
And then what about Vaseline beads?
Now, Vaselines are interesting. Now, where's that name Vaseline come from? Well, they kind of look like the old Vaseline jars.
Ah,
They were
you're right.
Yellow
Yeah.
glass, you know.
Yeah.
So they started calling any glass bead, which was actually a monochrome, a Venetian monochrome, which means only one color. A Vaseline bead if it was bright. And some of these are hand faceted, but you know, they would press them in a mold to get the original shape, and then they would finish them by hand on sanding discs, big sandstone discs.
And probably, I think, the most elaborate
Yes.
that I run into in trade beads are chevrons.
They're a drawn bead with stringers on the outside, snapped and tumbled.
So-
So sometimes heated up again to create that rounded shape.
And there are 6 layers of glass.
6 layers of glass.
6 layers individually laid down on top of each other. And then these beautiful blue chevrons. Talk about a delicious bead. Boy, I'd like to wear a whole bunch of strands of those. Those are incredible. And made pretty much the same way.
Yes.
That is a tiny stringer.
Yeah.
It's like a hair, like
Yeah.
you said. It's
Yeah.
like a hair.
Here's a strand of Dutch gooseberries that are the stringers also, and these are really, really old. Can you see the blue? Can you see that they are actually cobalt?
So when I was in Panama, I was working on a small ship, and I was working in the galley, and we were visiting the Kuna Indians. And I figured out right away that if I saved the 5-gallon oil containers in the galley and washed them out really well, I could trade a lot. So I would come walking down off the ship with my 2 5-gallon oil containers, one in each hand, and those Kuna women would be on me, and they'd have all these beads because they figured out that I loved beads, and I could trade 4 or 5 necklaces of trade beads for a 5-gallon, container. So it's that same idea of trade was alive and well. It was really fun.
Fun. That's the best way to get them.
It is. So it is an extraordinary world, these trade beads. You could go on and on and on. What I love so much about learning about them is how long it's been going on and how much has been traded all over the whole planet.
Yep, and still.
Yes,
And
so much
still.
more to learn.